What if the wizard Merlin wasn't just a figure of legend, but a prophetic voice whose words shaped the destiny of kings and empires? Today we are joined by the brilliant John Matthews, renowned author and historian, to explore his latest book, The Prophecies of Merlin, the first English transition of the 15th century text. In this captivating work, John brings to life a forgotten manuscript filled with Merlin's visions, offering fresh insights to his mysterious origins, his ties to King Arthur, and the deeper truths behind the myth. I'm excited to dive into this today. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios, the amazing author John Matthews. John, all the way over from the other side of the pond.
I am indeed in Oxford, yes.
Well, thank you for being here. And I just wanted to make this show today, this episode. Let's go ahead and honor your co-writer, Martin Haverkamp. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and show a picture for everybody that unfortunately we, the world, lost this amazing man. So I'd love to, as we go through this interview, talk about him and how he contributed to this amazing book. So,
well, it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for him, basically. So
awesome.
We owe him a lot.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and well, let's just start off with the legendary figure himself. And we're not talking about John Matthews; he is a legendary figure, but we're going to be talking about who was Merlin. And do you think, or do you believe, there's any historical basis behind this myth? Because we've heard Merlin from the beginning of time. It seems like.
Well, I mean, there's really more than one Merlin.
Oh.
Historical one, and there's a mythical one. And pretty much everything in this book is about the mythical one. But there was an actual man named Merlin, or rather in the Welsh, Merthyn, who lived in the 6th century and was a prince of part of Wales.
Oh, wow. Did not know that.
And there's a story about him written in the 12th century by an author called Geoffrey of Monmouth, who did a lot to, instill interest in King Arthur. And he told the story of this Merlin being involved in a battle in which he saw his fellow friends and fighters cut down and killed, and it drove him mad. The horror of it drove him mad. So he ran away into the forest, what is the Caledonian forest, which is a place that really exists, and became a kind of inspired madman. He lived in the forest. He talked to animals. His name was not Dr. Dolittle, but he did talk to animals. And he prophesied. He began to, for the first time, to talk about future events that he was seeing in vision. Now, he may have been mad. We don't know, of course, but the story is that he was discovered and healed by a Celtic saint called St. Kentigern, who was, again, a real person. He's the patron saint of Glasgow in Scotland. And he saved Merlin and brought him back to normal consciousness and to sanity. And that is where the story stops. But move forward from there, from the 6th century to the 12th, and suddenly Merlin is everywhere. And this is Merlin the magician, Merlin the enchanter, Merlin the alchemist, name whatever you like. And suddenly he is the eminence grise behind King Arthur. He's the one who creates the round table, round in the shape of the world, as he said, where all could meet equally. And who basically arranged for the birth of Arthur by bringing his parents together and allowing that to happen. He became such an important figure in the literary and historical landscape that everyone believed that he existed. And it wasn't long after this, in 1279, when an author called Richard of Cornwall decided to write a book of Merlin's prophecies. And that was the first. That was the first of dozens that came out every few years thereafter. There would be another collection of prophecies. And most of them, if not all of them, were events that had already happened, probably just happened. And so it was basically a series of authors getting together and saying, look, if we say Merlin saw this or Merlin had a premonition of this, then it's all going to sound really good and it's all going to happen. And so it was used very politically.
Isn't it always?
Those just gathered. It always is, yes. And that's how the whole story developed.
Well, in your new book, and we're going to show that book for our visual peeps, the Prophecies of Merlin, it brings a lost 15th century text into the modern world. And can you explain what these prophecies are and why they matter today? Why should we pick up this book and say these prophecies are relevant today?
Well, they are very general, I have to say, and in a way, the book is more about the figure of Merlin than it is about the prophecies themselves. And may I put my hand up to that right away? The prophecies, as they appear in the 15th century book that Martin Haverkamp translated for us, are mostly nonsense. They don't make any sense at all. But
that's
every
the
now
madman
and
part.
you'll drop a little message in about the Antichrist, who was at that time considered to be the living emperor of the West, and he will drop in mentions about sudden floods in the land and all kinds of stuff like this, quite general, not very easily pinned down to anything. But the thing that is really, for me anyway, important about this text is the fact that it contains information about Merlin that is not anywhere else. I mean, I've spent most of my life studying this material. I pretty much know it backwards, and I had not come across this. So, when Martin came up with this, I mean, I should explain that Martin was a collector of medieval manuscripts. He had a whole bunch of them. And he went to Paris. He was from Holland. He went to Paris to buy a book on Charlemagne, the French hero. And when he got there, the bookseller said, "I'm really sorry, it's already sold, but would this interest you?" And showed him a copy of this book, Prophecies of Merlin, published in 1498
Wow.
by Antoine Verrat. And this was a very early incunabula, first printed book. And that's how he said he wrote to me first and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "It looks incredible." And so he spent the next 5 years translating it. And it was, to me, it was astonishing because there are stories in there that, they don't appear anywhere else. They're not in any of the other texts that I know of. And I'm pretty sure that I've seen all of the others. So I think it's completely new. And it shows us a much more complex kind of character, one who you can really believe. You can believe his wisdom. He attacks things. I said that a lot of the use of these things was political. So he attacks the failings of the church, for instance. He talks about corruption within the Vatican, which I think has still been current in our time.
I think so.
At the moment, of course, but in our time. And he talks about Frederick II being the Antichrist, and that he's going to, all the world is going to fall in flames and it will be destroyed, and the devil will run across the land and kill everyone and carry them all off, all the bad ones anyway. So this is, at the time, this was incredibly relevant because, of course, they believed that this was going to happen. So, by the time we get to the 15th century, it's almost the end of the century. We're going to have the 16th soon, and people were already afraid then, as they always were. Mm-hmm. Each time there was a millennium, it would be, that's the end. We're done, And we saw this ourselves. Not that we felt that, hopefully, that the world was going to be destroyed in 2000, but we saw the fears about dreaded viruses and computer viruses, and everything was going to stop working. Mm-hmm. unfortunately, it didn't. But it's that millennial thing that really gets people going.
Yeah.
And so that is the essence of what all these books of prophecies were about.
You mentioned that he did, started translating these prophecies. How did he go about that? Just like the Bible, there's so many different people that translate, a lot of the books of fill in the blank, and these lost transcripts. How did he go about doing the translation, and then also how long did it take him to do that? Because it sounds like it was a chore.
It took him 5 years.
5 years, wow.
And he was translating from this particular manuscript, the 15th century one, which is in medieval French. And that in turn was drawn on an even older 13th century manuscript in medieval French, which in turn was borrowed from Latin.
Oh, no.
So
Wow.
there's a whole lineage of this. The Richard of Cornwall, who may or may not be real, was said to have translated the first edition from the Latin. And of course it was in Latin, so therefore it had to be from Merlin. And then it was in French, and then it was in more modern French. But still, by the time Martin got to it, we were looking at 15th century French, which is still quite complex.
Yeah.
And he himself, being Dutch, English wasn't his first language either. So it was quite an effort on his part. And how we would work was that he would do a section, a chapter, and then he'd send that to me, and I would go over it, and I would say, well, in English it's easier if you said this. So, I would adjust the text without changing the meaning, of course, until we had a workable form. And most of the time I was just boggling because of these extraordinary stories and details that were coming out of it. I mean, some of them are absolutely extraordinary.
I bet. And during, the translating of this manuscript, many of these stories were not widely known at all. And, he taught, I know in the manuscript, he talked about even, his parents, not being the nicest, put it lightly, nicest people, to his childhood and being imprisoned. So, and some of these tales that are lesser known, what really stood out to you, as somebody that's been, working with mythology and research and history? What really stood out to you, and what interested you to probably the most?
Well, most of all, I think what excited me was the way in which it presented Merlin as a much more human person.
Yeah,
He's always been seen as the great enchanter. He can change shape. He can cause things to happen. But here he is basically telling a bunch of monks the story. And all the way through, almost every verse or every chapter in the book begins with, listen,
right.
Let me tell you. And then he'd say, write this down, because this is important, right? So he would then go off and tell some extraordinary story, or just tell some, account of his own life, how he was born and believed to be a child of the devil until it was proved that he wasn't. He got baptized in time. And his mother called him Merlin because a Merlin hawk flew overhead at the time. And so that's how he got the name. But there's something about the way in which he talks to people. It's very immediate. And that was a difficult thing to capture, but I hope we did. Because, again, he would have meetings with bishops, and he would talk about theology. And he would mention the Crusades, which, of course, had happened by then.
Yeah.
But in the time when the original prophecies were written, the Crusades were actually happening at the time. So you had all these references to events that took place at that time. in the 13th and 14th centuries, when the Crusades were actually happening. And this was immensely important because in history, of course, this is where the great divide happens between East and West. And that's not entirely unknown for the moment. So it's that got me going. But some of the stories, I mean, we've heard in the past of his romantic affair with usually it's a girl called Nimue, but in this one it's Morgan Le Fay, who is the great bad queen, if you like, the one who is the evil fairy or whatever. She gets called lots of different things. Le Fay means fairy. There's this relationship, and he basically teaches her magic in return for her favors, shall we say. And she doesn't like him, and she actually hates him, and she sets out to destroy him. And in the end, she kind of succeeds because she locks him up in this cave, and she locks him up using his own magic, which he has taught her, against him. And then from within his cave, he continues prophesying, even after, as he says himself, my bones are dust, but my voice, my presence, my spirit is still here. And then you get all these other monks who would start looking, wanting to go and find Merlin's tomb. And quite a lot of the stories in the book are taken with their searches. Shall I tell you one?
I would love to hear it. Yes.
Okay, well, this one was a monk who said there was always someone who was a guardian of the secret of where Merlin was buried. Okay, so one of these monks comes along and tries to persuade this other man to tell him where Merlin was buried. So the guardian goes off to Merlin's tomb and says, Merlin, someone wants to come and see you. And Merlin says, all right, tell him to go to Camelot and to go into the king's garden, and he'll find a stone, and tell him to stand on that stone and say these words. So the monk goes off, comes to Camelot, goes into the garden, stands on the stone, says the words. The stone lifts out of the ground and flies through the air. And it takes him around the world. And what's so interesting about it is that there are all kinds of details. Like he says, I flew through Venice and I saw these carvings on the side of the great basilica. And there really are those carvings on the basilica. So whoever wrote this knew Venice. So we think that the monk who compiled the final volume was from that place. So you get all of this. And while he's on the way, the monk who's riding on the stone is listening to the spirit of Merlin's demonic father, who's imprisoned in the stone, telling him how all this happened. So you get all these stories layered up on top of each other. Wow. I love it. It's just that part that got me. No,
that would have gave me a little goosebumps as you were talking about it. So, well, what kind of baffles me is why a 13th century monk would compile this book, chose to keep it anonymous and to remain anonymous. Excuse me.
Oh, well, there's a very good reason for that. It's because, of course, these stories were not considered to be appropriate in the Christian world, you see. They were considered to be pagan.
Got it.
But, of course, that didn't stop the monks from collecting the manuscripts because they kept them in their great libraries.
Glad they did.
There's a monastery on one of the islands in the lagoon of Venice, which I've been to, which has a huge collection of medieval manuscripts. And this probably was amongst them. So he had to be careful, our anonymous monk, in what he was writing. But it's quite obvious that he loved it because he gets so excited at times. And you can see that he's not just sitting there quietly writing this sacred text. He's getting, what's Merlin going to do next? So it makes it very readable.
Oh, I think, we realize that, 13th century or 21st century monks, we just recently in the news, we've heard that they're not as live their lifestyle as we think they are or should be. So, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. One thing that you mentioned was relationships, and a relationship that goes hand in hand with Merlin is King Arthur. Can you talk about that relationship and how, you highlighted the connection between King Arthur and this mysterious figure of Prester John? And I'm King Arthur, I've heard. Prester John, I don't know who that is. Can you talk about that relationship, and then who in heck is Prester John?
Absolutely. Well, Prester John's very important, but we'll come back to him in a minute. The connection between Merlin and Arthur is very simple, that if there had been no Merlin in the stories that we have, there would have been no Arthur. Because, again, he has this vision of creating a kingdom led by a very superior leader who everyone will follow. And so he can get all of the fighting and feuding families together to join at the Great Round Table, where it becomes such an honor to be that, people come from all over the world. And the interesting thing about this is, just on a slightly sidetrack, is that what we know about the real Arthur, and there are 2 or 3 contenders for the character dating from the 2nd to the 6th century AD. The oldest one is a Roman general called Lucius Artorius Castus, Artorius being the Latin for Arthur, who really did live. We have evidence of his life. And his life was extraordinarily similar in some ways to that of the later Arthur. But the important point is that the later one, the 6th century Arthur, was the man who brought together all the feuding Celtic tribes after the Romans left. The Romans had conquered Britain, they left in 415, and at that point, everything went mad. So there along comes Arthur and brings them all together and establishes a kingdom. Now, this much is fairly historically known, even although there's not much written evidence for it. But most historians will accept that there was an Arthur. In fact, as one remarked a few years ago, if you take Arthur away, you have an Arthur-shaped hole behind. So there had to be someone. Anyway, that's the historical bit. But Merlin sees, in his mythological view of these things, he sees Arthur as a great leader who will bring everyone together, and he creates the Round Table. But before that happens, and he also arranges the Sword in the Stone episode, where Arthur is to prove that he is the rightful king. But before that, he brings together Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, who is the king of Britain at that time, and a lady called Grail, who is already married to the Duke of Cornwall. So there's a big fight, and the Duke of Cornwall is killed, and Merlin turns Uther into the shape of the dead king, and he goes off and has his way with Igraine. And the object of this is to bring about the birth of Arthur, which happens in due course. Merlin then takes the boy away and trains him and teaches him until he's ready to undergo the test of the Sword in the Stone. That happens. He pulls the sword, of course, because Merlin's arranged it. And everyone is very happy, and the story begins to roll. So the Round Table is founded, the knights come, amongst them is Lancelot, of course. Arthur gets married to Guinevere, and that story begins, and so on and so on. So really, Merlin literally is the operator behind all this, and eventually he goes away because he says he can't stand seeing what a mess everyone's making of it, basically. So he goes off to live in the forest in an observatory from which he can watch what human beings are doing. And if you believe in the myth, then he's still there, still doing that. Must be pretty tired of it by now.
I'm sure. So the myth of Merlin, when it comes to the death of Merlin, do we know anything of his later life, or is the mystery of him still hiding in the forest? What is the take on that? Like, what happened to Merlin as he got older?
Well, this is an interesting question in itself, because, of course, everyone assumes, because that's the way he's almost always portrayed, that Merlin is old.
Yes.
You take a picture and you'll see him with the long hair, the white beard, the pointy hat, all of which is nonsense. Nicol Williamson in the great movie Excalibur with the silver hat on his head is much more like what Merlin would perhaps have looked like. But the point is that Merlin can be both old and young. So in a way, he's ageless. And as I said, quite a long way into the stories, in fact, just before the Grail quest kicks off, he sets all that in motion, and then he goes, I can't watch any more of this catastrophe that's happening with everyone starting to fight again and everything breaking apart and Launcelot and Guinevere and all of that. So he withdraws. He gets his sister, who's called Ganida. No one knows about her much. She builds him a tower in the forest with 72 windows.
Why 72?
72, something to do with the number of star clusters that he wants to study. Because he's going to study the stars, and he's going to study what's happening outside. He doesn't come out anymore, it seems.
I was going to say, that's a lot of windows.
Sits up there and watches, basically. So, that's the story as far as it goes. So in a way, we don't know anymore. I mean, he just fades from the scene. And then you start getting, hundreds of years later, Merlin's prophecies, because we don't have a record of his death, he's probably still alive, still in the tower, still watching and seeing everything that's going on.
I'm sure he's not. I'm sure he's a little disappointed. I'm sure.
Probably is. But you asked me about Prester John. I'm sorry, I got.
Oh yes, let's get back to him. Yes.
Well, Prester John is again semi-mythical. What happened was that in the 12th century, the crowned heads of Europe, that is to say the kings, princes, emperors, and so forth, all received a letter which claimed to come from someone called Prester John. Prester means priest king, and that meant that he was not only a king, but also a sacred figure. And he claimed to be ruling over a kingdom, a vast kingdom in the east. There you go, there he is. And he was behind what you might call behind the lines, I suppose. He was behind the threat of the incoming people from who were trying to overcome the world through the Crusades. And so they all thought, this is wonderful. We have an ally with a huge army and great strength and great power who's a priest and a king, and he can rescue us all. So each of the kings sent a messenger back to Prester John, not knowing where he was really, and they were never seen again. And nothing more was heard of him. And it's always generally assumed that he was a confused memory of different travelers who'd heard of, extraordinary kings and khans. It was much more likely to have been probably one of the khans from that particular area. But the story didn't die; it kept on. And in more recent times, curiously enough, in occult literature, we've heard that he's still around and that he is the guardian of the Grail for the present, which is a very interesting story. I mean, I tried to track down this story, and what I did find was something very interesting. The Grail, I know we're not really talking about the Grail here, but just to sidetrack for a moment, the Grail was said to be kept in a sacred temple, and nobody knew where this was. Well, with a bit of research lasting 2 or 3 years, I tracked down a place called the Throne of Arches, which is in the present-day country of Azerbaijan, and therefore quite difficult to visit. And there's a ruin there, and the story is that it is the Temple of the Grail. And what's so interesting is that when an American archaeologist went there about 60 years ago, and he started looking at it, and he realized that the outline, the layout of this place, the Tactis Throne of Arches, was exactly the same as something described in a 12th century romantic story of the Grail. So, please yourself. But for me, that makes Prester John pretty important.
I've actually interviewed people before, and I've heard that King Arthur, and I'm sorry if people, I'm not saying it, this is what I've heard, that King Arthur and Jesus were the same people. I've heard that before. I don't know if that's true, or because Guinevere is Mary Magdalene and blah blah blah. But yeah, that's a very far stretched story there. But I've heard that before. But I found that fascinating that connection of the Grail was connected with Preston.
Well, that's a very extreme
It
idea.
It is.
I mean, I have come across that, but I mean what this probably derives from, I suspect, is the stories surrounding the town of Glastonbury in Somerset, which is said to be where Christ came with Joseph of Arimathea, who was his uncle, and they brought the Grail with them, and this was during Christ's teenage years, I suppose, and then he obviously went back to to the east, and right. Everything happened as it happened. But that story, remained, and to this day, you'll still get people who believe that the Grail was in Glastonbury. There's even a blue dish which actually dates from the Middle Ages and from Venice again, curiously enough. Wow. Which some people think is the Grail, and it's even been, I wouldn't quite say worshipped, but it's certainly been honoured. But then there are 5 or 6 others around the world that also are the same, Yeah. You folks have one in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm
sure that's, they got it all, they got it at the gift store, I'm sure.
Probably.
Well, this, your amazing book, I mean, for people out there, we're talking with John Matthews. You can pick up this book, The Prophecies of Merlin, the first English translation of the 15th century text. I'm sure people are going to say, there are several versions of Merlin's prophecies. So how does this differ from more familiar prophecies, from the Welsh traditions and so on?
Well, the difference is that most of these ones were made up in a much later period. So, if you're looking for a prophetic answer, you're probably not going to find it. But there are clues in there, which I think, and this is my personal opinion, do have a certain relevance for today, in that, again, it shows the chaotic nature of human relationships and how easy it is to believe something because you've been told it by someone who you think is superior to you and that you look up to, whoever it may be, and Merlin is often considered to be the prophet, I mean, he's the one that people mention most often if you talk about prophecy. And yet so much of that is based on hearsay and on fragments and pieces right. of literature that are both hard to find, hard to read, and in some cases virtually impossible to understand. And my friend Robert John Stewart did a book on the life of Merlin and the prophecies of Merlin some years ago now, in which he did some amazing interpretations of the ones not in our book, but in Geoffrey of Monmouth's story of the prophecies of Merlin. The fact that he seems to have prophesied the existence of a particular bridge across the Thames here in London. That kind of very basic reality, if you like, that can be reflected in these prophetic utterances. But I think Merlin is more than that. I think he's a figure that is like a dream almost, and yet very realistic in some ways. And that's one of the things, as I said, about this particular version of the prophecies that I found so interesting, because he behaves very much like a human being. He's fallible. He doubts things, and he also takes advantage shamelessly of young women who want to learn how to do magic. Right. Oh, come here, I'll teach you magic, and
yeah, no,
So, again, very human somehow. So, yeah.
As being in the world of paranormal and historical figures, there are a lot of people that take on figures such as Merlin to be their inspiration. Is there any locations or groups that you feel that still carry the memory and the mystical presence of Merlin today, that you see that the places you've traveled and the research that you've done?
Well, there are quite a few individuals in various places in the world who certainly carry something of that same mystical awareness that there is more to life than, just what we feel and see. Groups, again, there may be esoteric groups around. I wouldn't like to select any particular one to say that they were better or more realistic than others. But there are a number, certainly, that do exist. I mean, I would say perhaps mention the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, which is a worldwide organization. Oh, God, I'm sure you've had them on your program at some point. And although they're not particularly focused on Merlin, they do acknowledge the existence of the mythology of the Welsh, of the Celts generally, and of the Arthurian legends, which include Merlin, of course. So I would say that, if anything, that has a certain legitimacy, shall we say, there. But again, the thing about Merlin is that he's so enigmatic and so hard to pin down that, is a brave person who says that he's speaking for Merlin or represents Merlin or something. I've met one or two, but it never seems to quite work out somehow.
No, right? Well, I notice, in Hollywood, I mean, Merlin has been a figure in many TV and movies, and even movies they don't call him Merlin. Dumbledore and Harry Potter and Gandalf and Lord of the Rings. I mean, those, to me, you instantly think of Merlin. If you know who Merlin is before the movies came out, you're like, oh, that's Merlin, just a different name. I still find it fascinating that he has become a figure that has influenced just for entertainment purposes. And what do you think about him being exploited in that way?
I like it, actually. I mean, as long as it's done properly, I would say. True. I mean, when I mentioned Excalibur, which for me...
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Old film, I still think that's one of the best versions of it. I myself worked on another film in 2004 called King Arthur, done by Jerry Bruckheimer, and we had a sort of more shamanic Merlin in that one, which was rather good, I think. And of course, as you said, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Oh yeah,
true. Yeah,
I think Mr. Spock.
True.
I always think, you think of the Enterprise in the good old days of Star Trek. They're on the round deck of the Enterprise, which is just like the round table. And Kirk is Arthur, and Spock is Merlin. It fits perfectly within that. I've written about this in the past. And I think it's because there's always, if you have a hero or a heroine, they almost always need to have a wise person in the background. In biblical tradition, it's Moses, or one or two others, of course, too. But in these later ones, you need someone like Merlin. And even if, as you say, you don't call him Merlin, certainly there are strong parallels with it. And I mean, Dumbledore is, as far as I'm concerned, that's Merlin.
Right. You can't get far.
I don't know if you know the series Doctor Who, but there's a whole episode of Doctor Who in which we hear that one of Doctor's early names was Merlin. So he's even there as well. So.
Well, you've written many books about, mythology and Arthurian lore. What continues to draw you back to this theme, and how did your fascination get started?
I think I was always interested in it. I mean, I grew up in a house with very few books. And as many writers will tell you, when that happens, you end up in a house like mine now, full of books. But I know that one of the first books I was given when I was about 10 was a boy's retelling of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I don't have it any longer, but I sometimes wish I would, because it obviously inspired me greatly. I also had one on Robin Hood, and that's another mythology that interests me too. Mm-hmm. But it was the Arthurian one right from the start. And when I was 15, I decided that I wanted to write about this subject. not knowing anything, having any idea what I was taking on, because then I went to my local library, which just happened to have a special collection on mythology. And I went to the shelf and looked for Arthur, and I found there were 44 books on it. So I borrowed them in 3 at a time, which is all you could in those days. And I took them home and read them. And then I read the books that they mentioned. And gradually, I now have about 2,000 in this house, all on the subject. I've read all of the texts that I could get my hand on. I've just finished the second volume of a whole collection of stories, more or less untold since the Middle Ages, and many of them not translated before, which have just come out now. But it's always been, a mythology generally is something that I think has so much to teach us. I think we can learn from it. There's a quote that I love. I can't remember which Roman it was who did it. It was one of the Roman philosophers, but he said, mythology is something that is happening now and has not happened yet. And I love that, because again, there's a prophetic quality to that too. So in myth, we can find so much about ourselves, not just because we created these myths, assuming that we did, but because they tell us what we were looking for. They tell us what we needed. And they fulfilled that by these extraordinary stories. And I'm not just talking about Arthur here, but world mythology. You know, whether you go to Greek or Rome or Russian or Indian or any of these countries, you get the same kind of story. And that's why, I mean, there are Arthur figures in almost every culture in the world. Yeah. There's a Grail in almost every culture in the world. I've just finished a book about that, looking at all the different ones. So I suppose you could say I'm a bit obsessed with it. But I do love
maybe just a little. No,
just a little, just a bit, just a pinch. Yeah.
Well, like we said at the beginning, you know, Martin Haverkamp was your co-writer on this book, and I want to ask about your, upcoming projects, because I know you both had talked about doing another project together. Do you plan on taking that on? And I know you said his family also has created a fund, or maybe, I guess, what is it called?
I can't think of the word either. They're creating it.
Yes.
A way to gather money to help research the particular illness that took his life, which is Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah,
it's very rare. It's untreatable. It's absolutely deadly, and we need to know more about it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, on Martin's behalf, help to set up a foundation.
There we go. Foundation.
To help to study, this further as time goes on. Anyway, I mean, it was a tremendous shock to me, of course, to his family too. But I was talking to him, one day, and then a month later he'd gone, and it's very hard to believe even now that he's not with us anymore. We had, in fact, planned a book, believe it or not, on Prester John.
Oh,
and Martin had completed quite a lot of it. I was busy with other things, so he just pushed on. And although I haven't yet discussed this formally with his family, I'm hoping that they will allow me to complete the book for him, if possible, anyway. But
I would love to.
That's a little bit in the future.
I would love that. I think that's going to be another amazing book. And do you have any lectures coming up, or any other books that you plan on doing yourself?
Well, I'm just about to do a proper launch for the Prophecies at a bookshop in London called Atlantis, appropriately enough. That's on the 6th of August coming up, and I'm going to be talking there and doing a little workshop with the material from it. I'm doing quite a lot of podcasts and so forth, and interviews like this to both promote that book, and also the other one that I mentioned, the stories retold from the Arthurian legend. There are 2 volumes, The Great Book of King Arthur and His Knights and Realms of the Round Table, and they're beautifully illustrated in colour by John Howe, who did a lot of the design work on the Lord of the Rings movies. Yeah, I mean, there's always more. I always seem to have a little shelf of stuff. I've done an oracle based around the writings and teachings of John Dee, the Elizabethan magician, who is very much a Merlin figure.
That's pretty amazing.
That's coming out in a few weeks. So yeah, I'm very busy, and I have a big, at the moment, top secret project on the horizon.
Ooh.
Which you will definitely hear more about if and when it happens. But I'm not jinxing it. So
okay. Well, I won't pry then. Well, thank you, John, so much for being here, and everybody, please go out and pick up this book, "The Prophecies of Merlin." John Matthews and Martin Haverkamp. Please you can go to Amazon. I think you can go to your website. Is it hollowquest.org.uk? Yep. And pick it up, the book. And I mean, how many books have you written? I mean, that's...
the one that just came out was my 150th.
Ooh.
I know. Feels like that at times.
I know, sure. I'm sure. So you pretty much have your own library of books. So I appreciate you doing
I'm surrounded by them. You can't see them because of this background, but I am totally surrounded by mountains of them. Sometimes I think they'll all fall on me, and that'll be the end.
Well, that'd be a good way to go out, I guess.
It would, I guess, yes. And I'm also very active on Substack. If anyone subscribes to Substack, I have my site is called John's Little House of Myth and Legend. And you'll find writings about Merlin, and I've done several essays to advertise this work, and lots of other things of that kind too. So if you want to check out that as well, you'll find a few more nuggets.
Well, we never get tired of Merlin. So, John, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. This was a great conversation with John Matthews. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Club Paranormal Network. You can subscribe to our Apple, iHeart, Spotify, anything, the audio versions, you can listen to it and everywhere. Please share, like, and leave comments. We'd love to respond to you all. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. See you next Friday right here on the Club Paranormal Network. Bye.